While European nobles dined from wooden plates and emptied waste into castle courtyards, a city in Africa was hosting scholars who debated philosophy beneath marble arches. Gold was so plentiful there that its emperor reportedly handed it out to strangers in the street. This was a city of such immense wealth that when its ruler embarked on a royal journey, he unintentionally disrupted the entire Mediterranean economy for nearly a decade. This is not a myth. This is the true story of Timbuktu and the Mali Empire. A civilization so wealthy and sophisticated that it would make modern billionaires seem modest by comparison. Yet there is something rarely discussed. The collapse of this empire was not the result of invasion or natural catastrophe. It was driven by something far more unsettling. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why its legacy was quietly pushed to the margins of history for centuries. Our journey begins in the 13th century, deep in the heart of West Africa, where the Niger River curves through the Sahara like a ribbon of gold. At this vital crossroads between the Arab world and sub-Saharan Africa stood a modest trading settlement known as Timbuktu, soon to become the beating heart of the richest empire the medieval world had ever witnessed. But to understand how Timbuktu rose to such staggering heights, we must return to the beginning, to a legend so extraordinary that historians still argue whether it was reality or one of the most effective propaganda campaigns in African history. The year was 1235. Across West Africa, dozens of small kingdoms and tribal alliances were locked in relentless conflict, battling for control over the region's most valuable assets: gold, salt, and the trade routes that bound them together. From this chaos emerged a figure whose name would inspire fear in enemies and echo through generations. His name was Sundiata Keita, the Lion King of Mali. But Sundiata's path to power began not with triumph, but with humiliation. Born a prince, he was crippled from childhood, unable to walk until his teenage years. Many among his own people mocked him, seeing weakness where leadership was expected. To them, he was unfit to rule. Then disaster struck. His homeland fell to the sorcerer king Samangiru, and Sundiata was forced into exile, drifting from one royal court to another, surviving only through the mercy of strangers. This is where the story turns almost legendary. During his years of exile, Sundiata did more than endure. He learned. He studied the military strategies of different kingdoms, observed systems of governance, mastered diplomacy, and slowly grasped a revolutionary idea that would reshape African politics forever. Unity was stronger than division. So when Sundiata returned in 1235 to challenge Samangiru, he did not come back as a lone warrior seeking revenge. He returned as the leader of a powerful alliance. Dozens of once rival tribes united under a radical framework known as the Mandan Charter, often considered one of the earliest written constitutions in history. The Battle of Karina was not just a military victory. It marked the birth of an entirely new kind of African state. The Mandan Charter introduced principles that were centuries ahead of their time: protections for women and children during warfare, early environmental laws, and a social system that balanced individual freedoms with collective responsibility. But Sundiata's greatest insight went beyond law or conquest. He understood something many European rulers of his era never did. True power did not come from exploiting people, but from building systems that allowed everyone to prosper. Now imagine standing on the banks of the Niger River around the year 1250, barely 15 years after Sundiata's victory. To the north stretches the vast Sahara Desert, not the empty wasteland many imagine, but a hidden treasure vault. Beneath its sands lay some of the richest salt deposits on Earth. Salt so valuable that, pound for pound, it could be exchanged for gold. Deep in the desert stood Tagaza, a settlement built almost entirely from salt blocks. Homes, streets, even furniture were carved from solid salt. Enslaved laborers worked these mines under brutal conditions, rarely surviving more than a few years. Yet the profits were so immense that merchants accepted this human cost as the price of fortune. To the south, in regions like Bambuk and Bure, rivers carried gold dust downstream like shimmering promises. But Mali's wealth was no accident. The empire built an entire civilization around mastering these resources. Malian miners developed gold extraction techniques so advanced they would not be rivaled until the Industrial Revolution. They constructed vast underground networks with ventilation systems that allowed safe mining at depths that challenged even modern standards. They also solved one of the greatest problems of medieval mining: sustainability. Mines operated on rotational systems that allowed land to recover. Processing methods reduced water pollution. There were even early forms of environmental assessments. While European mines were often depleted within a generation, Mali's gold fields produced steadily for centuries. But gold and salt were only the beginning. The true genius of the Mali Empire lay in understanding this simple truth: wealth without knowledge fades, and knowledge without wealth cannot endure. That is where Timbuktu enters the story. Around 1100 CE, long before Mali's golden age, Timbuktu was little more than a seasonal camp for Tuareg nomads. Its name came from Tin Abitu, the place of Abitu, named after an elderly woman left behind to guard the camp's well while others traveled with their herds. That humble well, watched over by a single woman in the desert, would become the foundation of one of the most remarkable cities of the medieval world. Timbuktu's location was perfect by chance. It sat where the Niger River came closest to the Sahara, a natural meeting point between river traders and desert caravans. By 1200, the camp had grown into a trading post. Boats from the south brought gold, ivory, and enslaved people. Camel caravans from the north arrived with salt, horses, and goods from the Mediterranean world. But trade alone did not make Timbuktu extraordinary. When Mali incorporated the city around 1240, Sundiata envisioned something unprecedented in sub-Saharan Africa, a center of learning that could rival the great cities of the Islamic world. He offered protection and incentives to scholars, teachers, and artisans. Libraries were founded, schools were built. Knowledge became the backbone of the city's prosperity. By 1300, Timbuktu had become a magnet for intellect and commerce. Its population exceeded 100,000, larger than London or Paris at the time. But its true wealth was intellectual. The University of Sankore, which began as a mosque school, grew into an institution housing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, and law. What Mali had created was not just an empire. It was a sophisticated economic system unlike anything Europe had yet seen. While much of Europe relied on barter and subsistence farming, Mali operated a multi-currency economy. Gold dust handled major transactions. Cowrie shells served as everyday currency. Salt bars functioned as stored wealth. Most remarkably, Mali developed a credit system that allowed merchants to travel thousands of miles without carrying gold. A trader in Timbuktu could deposit wealth with a banker and receive a letter of credit, redeemable in Cairo, Damascus, or Mecca. This innovation, unknown in Europe for another 2 centuries, made long-distance trade safer and more efficient. By 1300, Mali was generating wealth equivalent to billions of dollars today. Chroniclers described palace rooms filled with gold dust stored like grain in massive clay jars. And soon, all of that wealth would be concentrated in the hands of one man, so legendary that European mapmakers would draw him holding a golden orb, a ruler whose single journey would reshape global history. His name was Mansa Musa. When Musa ascended the throne around 1312, he inherited more than an empire. He inherited the most powerful gold-producing system on Earth. His dominion stretched from the Atlantic coast deep into the Niger Basin, larger than Western Europe itself. But Musa's power was not just territorial. He was multilingual, intellectually formidable, and deeply involved in governance. Under his rule, Mali developed advanced communication networks, merit-based governance, and a centralized system balanced with local autonomy. Governors were appointed for competence, not birth. Power was divided to prevent corruption. Trade routes were secured. Weights and measures standardized. Prosperity in one region benefited the entire empire. By 1320, Mali controlled an estimated 10 to 15% of the world's gold supply, an economic position comparable to a nation controlling global oil today. This created an unprecedented challenge: how to use such wealth without destroying the economy through inflation. Musa's solution was economic diplomacy. He invested in education, infrastructure, and influence across the Islamic world. He funded mosques and universities from Mali to the Middle East, building networks of power and knowledge. Timbuktu became not just a city of books, but but a factory for administrators, diplomats, and scholars. Yet all of this would soon be tested, because as a devout Muslim, Mansa Musa was required to undertake the Hajj, a journey that would risk everything he had built. And in 1324, he made a decision that would make his name immortal. This was not just a pilgrimage. It was about to become the most extravagant display of wealth the medieval world had ever seen. But even Mansa Musa could not have imagined what his journey would unleash. The preparation alone took nearly 2 years and involved logistical challenges that would test even a modern state. Musa needed to ensure his empire remained secure and stable during his absence, which would last more than a year. He had to organize food, shelter, and transport for an enormous traveling court. And most dangerously of all, he had to calculate how much wealth to carry, enough to astonish the world, but not so much that it shattered his own economy. When the caravan finally assembled in 1324, it was unlike anything the medieval world had ever witnessed. Musa set out with an entourage of nearly 60,000 people, including 12,000 enslaved attendants, each dressed in fine silk and carrying staffs plated with gold. But the detail that truly revealed the scale of Mali's wealth lay in the animals. 80 camels, each burdened with roughly 300 pounds of gold dust, walked at the heart of the procession. That is more than 24,000 pounds of gold, worth hundreds of millions of dollars today, carried simply as spending money. And gold was not the most valuable cargo. Among the travelers were Mali's finest scholars, architects, artisans, and administrators. Musa was not merely transporting riches. He was showcasing the intellectual and cultural power of his empire. When the caravan finally left Mali, no one, not even the emperor himself, could have predicted that this act of religious devotion would become the most disruptive economic event the Mediterranean world had ever experienced. What followed would collapse markets, alter trade routes, and force Europe to confront a truth it had long ignored. Africa was home to a civilization far richer and more sophisticated than they had imagined. In early 1324, a vast golden procession flowed eastward across the Sahara toward Mecca. At its head rode Mansa Musa, but what followed defied every known idea of wealth. The caravan stretched for miles. Contemporary Arab chroniclers struggled to describe it. One observer wrote that the dust raised by the travelers could be seen from the horizon, while the glitter of gold shimmered in the sun from miles away. This was not a random crowd. It was a carefully curated display of Mali's society. There were scholars from Timbuktu carrying rare manuscripts, skilled craftsmen, goldsmiths, leatherworkers, architects, textile makers, ready to demonstrate Mali's expertise wherever the caravan stopped. Even the enslaved attendants were not ordinary laborers. Many were educated, trained specialists whose presentation was meant to reflect the empire's prosperity and order. Musa was displaying human capital the way other rulers displayed armies. The animals themselves were extraordinary. Arabian horses of unmatched quality, herds of camels for riding, transport, and milk. And everywhere, gold, woven into fabrics, shaped into ornaments, even used where iron would normally suffice. Not because iron was scarce, but because gold was plentiful. The caravan moved slowly, about 15 miles per day, not from necessity, but by design. This was no ordinary pilgrimage. Musa used the journey to conduct diplomacy, gather intelligence, and project imperial authority far beyond Africa's borders. At each major stop, he received local rulers, negotiated trade arrangements, and assessed the political balance of the Islamic world. By the time he reached Egypt, Musa likely understood Mediterranean politics better than many of its own leaders. His arrival in Cairo in July 1324 stunned the city. Cairo was already among the wealthiest cities on earth, the heart of the Mamluk Sultanate. The Sultan expected a respectful foreign king offering tribute. For the first time, Europeans began asking serious questions. Where was this gold coming from? The answer, Mali, forced a radical rethink of Africa's place in the world. Maps were redrawn. Trade plans changed. The balance of medieval power quietly shifted. By the time Musa reached Mecca in late 1324, he had already reshaped global economics. But Mecca offered something even more valuable than prestige, knowledge. During the pilgrimage, Musa met scholars, engineers, traders, and rulers from across the Islamic world. He learned new architectural techniques, advanced methods of mining and metallurgy, developments in astronomy and medicine, and, most importantly, innovations in finance and long-distance trade. He also learned something unsettling. European powers were searching the Atlantic coast for a sea route to Africa's gold. The Ottomans were expanding toward North Africa. Rivals were watching Mali closely. The empire's wealth had made it famous, but fame attracts predators. When Musa returned to Timbuktu in 1326, he returned transformed. He brought with him master architects like Al-Sahili, elite scholars, and craftsmen from across the Islamic world. Timbuktu was no longer just a trading hub. Under Musa's vision, it became a city of stone, learning, and global influence. Mosques rose that rivaled Cairo's. Palaces sprawled across acres. The University of Sankore expanded into one of the greatest centers of learning on Earth, housing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Scholars conducted original research in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and history. Timbuktu became not just a library of the past, but a factory of new ideas. By the 1330s, Mali stood at its peak, wealthy, educated, powerful, and globally known. But this success carried a hidden cost. Foreign attention intensified. European explorers advanced along the coast. The Ottomans threatened trade routes. Regional rivals like Songhai began to challenge Mali's authority. Internally, the empire grew dependent on complex systems that required constant strong leadership. When Mansa Musa died in 1337, he left behind one of the most advanced civilizations the medieval world had ever known. He also left behind an empire so intricate, so exposed, and so coveted that maintaining its golden age would prove far harder than creating it. And that is where the story begins to darken. By 1340, less than 3 years after the death of Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire was already beginning to crack. But what ultimately destroyed Timbuktu was not slow decline or simple economic strain. It was a single, catastrophic betrayal, one that emerged from a direction Musa's successors never imagined. When that betrayal finally unfolded, it did more than end Mali's golden age. It ensured that one of the greatest civilizations in human history would vanish from global memory for centuries. Mansa Musa's death in 1337 created a vacuum at the very center of power, exposing a weakness shared by even the most advanced medieval empires: succession. Mali possessed impressive administrative systems, but its stability still depended heavily on the authority, reputation, and vision of its ruler. Musa was succeeded by his son, Magan, yet the transition revealed fractures that had long been hidden by Musa's extraordinary leadership. Magan was educated and capable, but he lacked his father's political instinct and, more importantly, his global prestige. Provincial governors who had once obeyed Musa without question began testing the limits of imperial authority. Taxes arrived late or not at all. Trade disputes that Musa would have resolved instantly grew into prolonged conflicts. Slowly, the delicate balance between local autonomy and central control, the very foundation of Mali's success, began to unravel. At the same time, a deeper crisis was unfolding. Musa's legendary generosity during his pilgrimage to Mecca, combined with vast construction projects in Timbuktu, had quietly strained even Mali's immense gold reserves. For the first time, the empire began to realize that limitless wealth was an illusion. Even the richest mines could be depleted through mismanagement. Magan attempted to preserve his father's policies, but without Musa's personal relationships with foreign merchants and rulers, Mali grew increasingly isolated from the global trade networks that had fueled its prosperity. When Magan died after only 4 years on the throne, the empire was already weakening. His successor, Suleiman, was more capable, but he inherited a realm under mounting internal and external pressure. By the mid-14th century, the world around Mali had changed, largely because Musa himself had revealed its wealth to the world. European powers were no longer satisfied with trading through North African intermediaries. They wanted direct access to Africa's gold. Portuguese traders established coastal outposts, offering Mali's southern regions trade routes that bypassed Timbuktu entirely. This was not mere competition. It was an existential threat. If gold could be shipped directly from Atlantic ports to Europe, the dangerous and expensive trans-Saharan routes lost their value. The Portuguese also began mapping the African coastline, studying local politics, and cultivating alliances with kingdoms that had once been Mali's vassals. To the north, the Moroccan Marinid dynasty consolidated control over the northern ends of the Saharan trade routes, positioning itself to challenge Mali directly. They had learned from Musa's example: control gold, and you control power. Most dangerous of all were the Songhai, Mali's former vassals. For over a century, Songhai leaders had accepted Mali's dominance because it brought stability and profit. Now, sensing weakness, ambitious princes began to imagine independence. This transformation, from loyal subordinate to formidable rival, was deliberate and calculated. The architect of this shift was Sunni Ali, who rose to power around 1464. He studied Mali carefully and understood that conquest alone could not build an empire. Like Musa, he combined military strength with economic control and political strategy. But Sunni Ali possessed advantages Mali no longer had. Firearms, introduced through European trade, gave his armies a decisive edge. And Mali's vast size, once its strength, had become a liability. Rather than attack directly, Sunni Ali began with economic warfare. He offered merchants better terms along Songhai-controlled routes, negotiated independently with North African traders, and lured scholars and administrators away from Timbuktu with higher pay and greater influence. Many of the foreign experts once invited by Musa had never fully integrated into Malian society, and now they defected. Internally, Mali was deteriorating. Administrative systems required constant oversight, but declining revenues and divided attention led to corruption. Governors kept tax revenues for themselves. Soldiers went unpaid and undisciplined. Most devastating of all, Timbuktu's intellectual networks began to collapse. Scholars left. Libraries decayed. The University of Sankore, once the jewel of Islamic scholarship, lost its international prestige. Students who once traveled from across the Muslim world chose Cairo, Baghdad, or Cordoba instead. By 1400, Mali was trapped in a vicious cycle. Economic decline weakened education and governance, which further deepened economic failure. Even contemporary observers noticed the shift. Ibn Battuta, who visited Timbuktu during its height, later wrote that decline had already begun. By 1450, the city's population had fallen dramatically as merchants and scholars departed. By 1500, Timbuktu was no longer under Malian control. Songhai dominated the region. Yet Timbuktu's greatest treasures, its manuscripts, libraries, and accumulated knowledge, still survived. What came next was unimaginable. In 1591, Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur launched an unprecedented expedition across the Sahara. His goal was not merely conquest, but total control of the African gold trade. An army of 4,000 men, armed with firearms and artillery, marched over 1,500 miles of desert under the command of Judah Pasha. When Moroccan forces reached Timbuktu, resistance was brave but futile. Traditional weapons stood no chance against muskets and cannons. The city fell within weeks. But the real destruction followed. The Moroccans did not merely seize gold. They dismantled a civilization. Libraries were looted. Manuscripts were burned or carried away. Scholars were killed, enslaved, or forced into exile. The University of Sankore was abandoned. Trade systems were stripped for extraction, not preservation. Timbuktu was reduced from a global center of learning to a colonial outpost. Over decades, the population collapsed. Knowledge networks were severed. And then came the final act, erasure. Centuries later, European colonial writers, encountering a diminished region, used its condition to justify racist assumptions. Timbuktu was dismissed as myth. Mansa Musa's wealth was labeled exaggeration. African intellectual history was ignored. Only a few families preserved the truth, hiding manuscripts in homes, caves, and desert villages for generations. It wasn't until the late 20th century that historians began uncovering the scale of what had been lost. What we are rediscovering today is not just text, it is proof. Proof that medieval Africa produced world-class scholarship in astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Proof that Timbuktu rivaled Baghdad. Proof that Mali was not an exception, but a pinnacle. Mali fell, but its legacy survived. Buried, silenced, and nearly forgotten, and now, it is finally being remembered.